Another rule for choosing a text is that the text should not be obscure. It ought, as a rule, to exhibit its meaning readily. Plain texts are often the most remembered. Edward Reynolds warns us against the danger of, quote, the vain affectation of finding something new and strange in the plainest texts, which show pride and wantonness much more than solid learning or judgment. He said that in his sermon on self-denial in his works. It's scarcely ever proper to choose a text that will seem odd. You don't want the people to walk away thinking that you're preaching on something odd. This is the reason why explanation in the beginning of the sermon is so paramount to success. Explaining the text first, because you want to show your people how you come to a specific point, a specific doctrine, the reducible point of the sermon. You want to show them how you got there, otherwise they're not going to believe you. Also, Brodus says, do not avoid a text because it is familiar. Sometimes people get bored of the same sermon that's plainly delivered because the text are all salvation messages. That's different than saying, don't avoid a text because it is a familiar text. Don't avoid preaching on the cross because it is a familiar text. Preach the whole counsel of God and do not habitually neglect any portion of Scripture. Be careful not to use texts of Scripture that are untrue, such as the speeches of the Pharisees or some wicked king or Pharaoh. The fool says in his heart there is no God. So you don't preach a sermon that there is no God because the fool says it. You would preach that sermon in a far different light, utilizing that text in the right way. In the course of pastoral labor, consider choosing texts based on the present condition of the congregation. This means that the preacher doesn't simply preach what he likes, what he wants to preach, but what God desires him to discern what the congregation needs. Blackwell notices and profitably enlarges upon the following particulars in reference to the choice of a subject and text: the spiritual state of the people, their capacity for hearing the gospel, their predominant sins, and providential occasions. That means that the same sermon that you preach today or the next Lord's Day in the church that you're in could be changed in some way, not intent of its meaning, but in its application, if you were to go to another church, visit there, and preach it to that congregation. So all of those things have to be thought about when you choose a particular text to preach.